From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Alaska's new system of ranked choice voting goes up for potential repeal on the November ballot, as the state's U.S. House race becomes another argument that this voting reform is not working as its advocates intended. Plus, the Kamala Harris and Donald Trump campaigns jockey over the mute button at their debate scheduled in 2 weeks. And will Trump's hedging on abortion give pause to Republicans who call themselves pro-life? Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Mene Ukwe-Barua. Alaskans adopted a top 4 ranked choice voting system in a 2020 referendum, but it's been used in 2 U.S. House races so far, including last week's primary. And Kim, I wonder if either of these results is what reformers intended or imagined would happen. And as a reminder, here's the way the system is supposed to work. There's an open primary with all the candidates who want to run for this House seat on the ballot. Voters get to choose one, and then the top 4 finishers in that go on to the general election with a ranked choice voting ballot. So voters can rank their preferences from 1 to 4. A candidate to win has to get over 50% of the vote. And so if no candidate in the first round hits that mark, the lowest performer is eliminated, and that person's supporters are reshuffled to their subsequent preferences, assuming that they marked number 2, number 3, number 4 on the ballot. But last week's primary is fascinating because what we are going to end up with is a more typical head-to-head Republican to Democrat confrontation with a couple of minor parties on the ballot. Here are the results from Tuesday. The incumbent Democratic Congresswoman Mary Peltola with 50.4% of these open primary votes, Republican Nick Begich with 26.9%, and then Republican Nancy Dahlstrom with 20%. And then the fourth finishing candidate, who is supposed to go on to this ranked choice voting general election, has only about a half a percentage point, 600 votes in total. And fascinating then, last week, Kim, on Friday, the number 3 candidate, Nancy Dahlstrom, the lieutenant governor, said she was dropping out. I entered this race because Alaskans deserve better representation than what we have received from Mary Peltola in Washington. At this time, the best thing I can do to see that goal realized is to withdraw my name from the general election ballot and end my campaign, unquote. So, Kim, it's fascinating here because this is not, I think, what ranked choice voting, these advocates, when they passed this reform, imagined. They thought we were going to have 4 real, solid, serious politicians with experience and records duking it out in the general election and voters being able to choose between them.
Well, I think that might be a little generous to what they wanted. I would put a couple of different camps out there when it comes to those who support ranked choice voting. I do think that there are some people who think that it is a better way of breaking partisanship in the United States and in elections. I could go hammer and tongs at that argument and why it's not actually what ends up happening. And Alaska is a very good example of that. I do think that it's also interesting, though, that a lot of the money that has come for this, and Alaska was clearly chosen as a guinea pig when this was put on the 2020 ballot as an initiative. It was done very sneakily. The beginning of the initiative was actually about clean elections and campaign finance reform, this very long, it was many, many pages long initiative. At the end, it was like, surprise, we're also going to completely change the way you vote. It was a lot of liberal groups that gave money to this, and unsurprisingly, maybe because of the way the system works, it allowed Lisa Murkowski, who is a very unpopular Republican, to win re-election in a Republican state, and allowed a Democrat to win the House seat, again in a very Republican state. So if that was the end goal by some, they certainly accomplished what they meant for it. But it has been a complete disaster in Alaska. The first jungle primary in 2022, I would note, featured more than 40 candidates on the ballot. It was absolutely impossible to even separate or know who each of these people were. There was no substantive debates as a result. It was simply a mind-boggling scrum where people kind of closed their eyes and filled in a dot in the end because they weren't quite sure what was going on. Santa Claus was on the ballot. I mean, the whole thing was insane. And then the ranked choice system, yes, in 2022, when you moved on to the general, became this very complex game of chess where there were shifting alliances between the parties, people teaming up, some people dropping out in order to help other folks, people sending out flyers to your home saying, vote this particular way because it was going to help the candidate you wanted to win, but actually end up hurting the candidate you wanted to win. It was mind-boggling for Alaskans. And so the experience that they took away from that is this is dumb, and we might as well just go back to the way we were voting, the way that we were voting before ranked choice, even with ranked choice. So yes, when these primary results came out, Mary Peltola was in the lead. Nick Begich was in second place. Nancy Dahlstrom was in third. She had insisted all along that even though she was trailing in the polls behind Begich, that she would not get out under any circumstances. When the results came in, the pressure campaign on her was overwhelming. Her Facebook page had followers on it saying, read the room, get out. There was a petition that was started by grassroots Republicans. National Republicans weighed in saying, you need to get out, you need to get out. She finally bowed to that, likely to salvage her own political future. And so we're going to have essentially, yes, a two-person race going into the ranked choice general election. There will be a couple of other people on the ballot. They are right now, both of them polling less than 1%, so they won't really register. But this will be a head-on-head regardless of what the ranked choice crowd wanted.
The withdrawal of the number 3 candidate, though, is a lesson from that 2022 House race where Mary Peltola initially won. And as a reminder of one of the quirks of the ranked choice system, when the bottom candidate is eliminated, those voters are reshuffled. And so it really matters who gets eliminated first. And we saw that in this 2022 primary. Just to go through these numbers again, in 2022, Mary Peltola came in first in the general election with about 40% of first choice votes. Number 2 then was Sarah Palin with 31% and Nick Begich with about 29%. What happened was Nick Begich was eliminated first. Some of his supporters migrated to Sarah Palin, but there were some of his supporters who didn't like Sarah Palin. And so that allowed Mary Peltola to get over the top. But if you dig into the data, if Sarah Palin had been eliminated, a very high percentage of her supporters liked Mr. Begich and thought that he was an acceptable alternative. So if she had been eliminated first, he would have won that race by an even bigger margin than Mary Peltola did in the end. And so one of the strange things that is counterintuitive here is the ultimate winner can sometimes depend on who comes in number 2, number 3, number 4, and what the order of the eliminations are, which is one of the things that I think it just strikes people as off about how this whole system works. And so the lesson of that, Monet, I don't think that was what the ranked choice advocates really thought was a great first showing for this new top 4 system. The lesson for that is the withdrawal of the number 3 Republican candidate. And I don't know if that will just be the expectation now, if this ranked choice system continues, that the parties are going to do their own kind of pressure campaign winnowing in order to make sure that it is not a 1, 2, 3 choice on the ballot in November.
Right. So what you just laid out, that story of the 2022 House race in Alaska, I think shows the difference between what ranked choice proponents describe it as and how it actually plays out in fact. They often refer to it as an instant runoff. The idea is that instead of having to go several rounds of actual voting to select the top favored candidate, you're going to have this system that allows voters to rank their preferences, and then the rounds are tabulated as the ballots are counted. And that will accurately reflect what the preferences of voters would be as they go down the list of candidates and get the optimal choice who's going to best reflect a real majority of voters. But I think the fact that we've seen as this has actually played out is that voters often do have different behavior in a head-to-head vote between 2 choices than they would in a list of candidates. I think it's very likely, as you described, that there were a lot of voters who had some, misgivings about Sarah Palin, who voted for Nick Begich in that first round in 2022, who then listed Peltola as their second choice, essentially as a protest vote against Palin because she was unpopular. But does that mean that's necessarily how they would have voted in a direct head-to-head of Palin versus Peltola it's very possible that a lot of these conservative voters would have held their noses and voted for the Republican candidate if they were given that direct choice. And so it undermines the entire premise of ranked choice, which is that we're predicting how voters would feel and how they would vote in a variety of different scenarios, when the fact is that isn't always necessarily the case. And there's quite a lot of wisdom in elections that are structured to present a clear choice to candidates that's very legible to them, where they know exactly who they're going to have to choose between and can, directly select that person, as opposed to having to essentially imagine scenarios pairing different head-to-heads that they don't actually know whether or not those are going to play out.
Hang tight. We'll be right back in a moment. Welcome back. Taking up the point that Monet was making before the break, there's some clarity in a head-to-head result. And so if the idea of this ranked choice reform movement is to increase the quality of the candidates that are getting elected to these public offices, another way to go about that is more straightforward to my mind would be primary runoffs. And so you don't have divisive candidates winning 9-person party primaries with 33% of the vote and then advancing to the general election in these safe seats and winning those seats in Congress. I won't name names, but you can probably think of a few examples, some of whom may have been defeated in party primaries this year, recently, just recent weeks. But Kim, the other issue with ranked choice, to my mind, is that it's complicated and it's opaque, unlike that kind of straightforward head-to-head runoff system. And I would point to a local election, a school board election last year in Alameda County, California, where in January, 2 months after Election Day, it was discovered that they had counted the ballots wrong. There were some ballots that were, this is a story at the time, the software was inadvertently configured so ballots with blanks would be suspended for that round of tabulation. And that affected the elimination, the order of elimination, causing this sort of cascade that we're talking about. And the result was that the outcome was actually incorrect. They tabulated the ballots wrong, and the wrong person was announced as the winner. And this is something, again, that I think hits people when these announcements come out about all this tabulation and elimination. The way that Alaska did it in 2022, they didn't even provide the data in any sort of readable way where a voter could go through and look at how the tabulation went along through these rounds of elimination. You had to have some sort of special software to do that. And that gets us to the other choice that will be facing Alaskans this fall. There's an initiative on the ballot to repeal this ranked choice system only 4 years after it was approved by voters. Some jockeying at the Alaska Supreme Court about whether the initiative had met the requirements to appear on the ballot, but the Supreme Court appears to be blessing that now. Kim, what do you expect for this debate and whether voters in Alaska are fed up with this and likely to give it the heave-ho?
2 points real quickly just on the system as it is right now in Alaska. You're right, Kyle. One thing which was a big problem was how opaque the tabulation aspect of this was, and it really diminished confidence in elections. It's one thing, people have enough worry already about going in, does your vote count? Was it tabulated correctly? Remember everything we went through with 2020. Now imagine just having to sit here and wait for some number cruncher in some back office to come out and say, really, truly, this is how all the numbers turned out. And this person was eliminated. And then this all shifted here. It really did not do a lot for confidence. But the other thing, to Monet's point about the difference between this and a head-to-head, you cannot overstate this, because ranked choice balloting can also be disenfranchising, meaning a lot of people went into this, and despite all these efforts at education, and again, no one should have to take a course in game theory to even just be allowed to vote or essentially feel confident about voting. But there were a lot of Alaskans on the Republican side who kind of didn't get this, and they went in and they just voted for the person they wanted. For instance, Nick Begich. And what that meant is in subsequent rounds, they had no say in what happened, which is very different from a head-to-head where they could have come back again and voted for the person they want. And what they didn't realize is that by not marking another bubble, making Sarah Palin their second choice, and again, some of them didn't like her, but some of them just didn't get it. and they didn't mark a second thing. And so they didn't effectively count in the subsequent rounds. So that is a problem too. On this initiative to get rid of this, Alaskans hate this system. The majority of them do. And it was very easy for them to get a petition signed, an initiative, the subsequent signatures, and get it on the ballot. Now, there was drama because the group that's been really spearheading this, which is one of these classically fuzzy named, I think it's Alaskans for Better Elections. It's funded by a lot of out-of-state money. They took it to court. They tried to throw out this initiative because some of the signature books that had been signed ended up being notarized by a notary who had let her certification lapse. And they tried to turn that into a big deal. It went all the way up to the Alaskan Supreme Court. Thankfully, the Alaskan Supreme Court noted that didn't make the signatures any less valid. The petitioners were allowed to correct it, get them signed off by a notary that had their certification, and this will indeed go ahead. I think on its merits, there wouldn't be much of a question that this will get repealed. But I would note that the out-of-state forces that were behind this in the first place are now running a flood of ads in Alaska. You can't move. They're on the radio. They're on social media. They're on TV. And the hilarious thing is saying, look, ranked choice voting, if you look at the history, it's really good for Republicans, which is certainly not the case for Republicans in Alaska. And people are rolling their eyes. But money can do a lot in these races. And don't forget, Alaska's a very small media market. A little bit of money goes a long way. I think the people who are supporting the yes on repeal, meaning get rid of ranked choice, are being vastly outfunded. So it could still be tight in the end. Do bear in mind in 2020, this passed with the barest of minimum, just like I think a few hundred votes in the end.